Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar. I'm Michaela Klauser on the producer education team here at NCBA, and thank you for joining us. We have a great lineup of speakers for you tonight. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. As a participant, your line will be muted, but please feel free to type in questions in the question box on your screen during the webinar, and at the end of the presentations, we'll get to as many of those as time will allow. If you're having trouble with your technology or joining only for the audio, the webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing in a few days at ncba.org underneath the producer tab, or you can head to our YouTube channel and find it there. Tonight's webinar, titled Delivering Excellence with Every Movement, will feature Allison Rivera from NCBA, Jesse Fulton from the University of Nebraska, Colby Carpenter with W&J Carpenter, and Dr. Julia Herman, also with NCBA. Allison Rivera is the Executive Director of Government Affairs for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. She is a native North Carolinian who moved to DC to work on policy and politics. She has gained years of experience in agriculture, defense, foreign affairs, trade, transportation, natural resources, and energy policy. Before coming to NCBA, Allison spent 9 years on Capitol Hill working for 4 different members of Congress from North Carolina to Northern California. At NCBA, she leads the Ag and Food Policy and Cattle Health team with a focus on the Farm Bill, animal health, transportation, and immigration and labor policies. Next, Jesse Fulton, originally from Kentucky. Jesse earned his bachelor's degree in animal science at Morehead State University and his master's in animal science at South Dakota State University. Jesse previously served as the director of producer education with NCBA and now serves as a Nebraska beef extension educator and the director of Nebraska beef quality assurance at UNL. Now we have Colby Carpenter and his Colby and his family run W&J Carpenter Incorporated based in Arapahoe, Nebraska. The Carpenter family transports over 500,000 cattle per year to nearly 20 states. The company prides itself in employee training, animal handling, and working with the industry to improve equipment. They were awarded the 2022 BQA Marketer for their efforts. And to wrap us up, Dr. Julia Herman, she serves as NCBA's beef cattle specialist veterinarian and consults on animal health and welfare, biosecurity, and foreign animal disease preparedness and other preventative medicine topics. She has spent time in rural veterinary practice in Kansas, teaching livestock medicine in the Colorado State Veterinary Medicine Program, and currently leads education development and veterinary outreach for the producer ed team and the BQA program. With that, Allison, I am going to pass it off to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Michaela. Appreciate it. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to join us. Again, Allison Rivera. I have the privilege of working in the DC office of NCBA. I also have the privilege of working on transportation issues, specifically in the space of livestock hauling, and it is one of the issues I enjoy the most. And so I have quite a few topics that I wanted to touch on tonight. I will start off by saying I think we have a lot of opportunities with a new administration, a new Congress, but one that certainly has just as tight margins as we saw last Congress. But I do think with a new DOT secretary and Secretary Duffy and a few other new members of Congress that definitely understand the transportation needs and how we need to really shift the focus in that space from where it's been for the last 4 years. I think that I definitely see some light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm very excited to kind of continue those conversations, get into DOT to meet with the new staff as they build out their team over there. We do not have a new name for the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administrator over there yet. But we hope it is someone that maybe someone that doesn't necessarily know our industry, but is willing to have that conversation and better understand the needs of our industry. We are also in March of 2025. By the end of 2026, Congress will need to pass a new highway bill. So those conversations on the Hill about priorities from different groups have already started, and NCBA has participated in that as well through a couple of different conduits. So that is a place where we have gotten wins in the past and where I feel like we can make some inroads in the future. So with that, I'm going to kind of just jump in. I've got quite a few topics that I wanted to cover, and hopefully these are helpful to you and you can get a sense of kind of the glide path forward on a lot of these issues for NCBA. So we are currently sitting in an electronic logging device delay. You all know that we have fought tooth and nail for that ELD exemption for livestock haulers through the appropriations process, which is something that we have to do year after year. We are currently in appropriation season again. It is not an easy time in DC to get actual appropriations bills done, but we continue to push through. And regardless, if we do have what we call a continuing resolution to keep the government funded and open, which we hope that we continue to do that through next week, our ELD delay for livestock haulers remains in place. My plan forward with ELDs, though, is to work towards a permanent exemption so that we do not have to go through the appropriations process every single year. It makes sense. We've had it in place for almost 8 years. It is not something that anyone on either side of the aisle puts a fuss up about through the appropriations process. So it seems to be going okay and something that I think we can make permanent. The second item is hours of service. That's something that we are always going to continue to find flexibilities on and continue to work on those items. In this next highway bill, my request, whether we get this through Congress or whether we go through DOT, my request is going to be a permanent exemption for livestock haulers from hours of service. The comments that I make around that, one, you cannot take hours of service, which again, I think most of you on this call know what the current hours of service regs are, but it's 14 hours of on duty time, 11 hours of drive time, and a 10-hour rest. A lot of our arguments are a fully loaded livestock trailer can't stop at a rest stop or on the side of the road because there is no space at rest stops, fully loaded with cattle, for example, on a hot day. So when we talk about hours of service, we have a regulation that is across trucking and it does not fit our industry. It does not fit the needs of the animals that are being hauled, and it certainly does not do any service for our industry. So when we look at the exemption that we had from hours of service during COVID, that was a 2-year period under an emergency declaration through both the Trump and Biden administrations, where the livestock hauling industry was completely exempt from hours of service. If we were not able to maintain that high level of safety that we do maintain, if we hadn't maintained that, we would not have continued to get that exemption month after month. They gave it to us for a 3-month period, and then it was literally me going to FMCSA asking for an extension month after month because we needed it during that emergency time. So in that space, we have continued to ask DOT for any safety data that they have, but we think that we have a very good case to ask for a permanent exemption from hours of service specific to the livestock hauling industry as we move forward, as we work with this new DOT secretary, and as we work with committees of Congress. Another item that we have continued to work on for before my time at NCBA and during, and continue to work on, is truck weights. This is an issue that I worked on as a Hill staffer back in the day, and I continued to work on when I got to NCBA. I think we have finally seen some light at the end of the tunnel. We have a coalition that we work with that has a lot of big companies kind of across ag and outside of ag. And we have really worked hard on a concept of a pilot program, a state pilot program. Any state could opt in, and it would be 91,000 on 6 axles. It's bridge formula compliant. The goal is to get trucks, onto the federal highway system. We've made a lot of inroads with the naysayers out there on lots of different things, but I think 91,000 on 6 has been a compromise, but one where DOT can collect safety data and and hopefully feel comfortable eventually increasing that in a permanent way. Current truck weights on highways has not been increased since the 80s, and some of you on this call might be from states where it's upwards of 100,000 100,000 pounds within the state. So we think it's a very reasonable ask, and we will continue to push for that pilot program. A good piece of information on that is that Secretary Duffy, the new DOT secretary, when he was a member of Congress from Wisconsin, he is on record as voting in support of increasing truck weights. So that is certainly a positive in our minds. Just wanted to remind everyone that as far as ag exemptions go, in the last highway bill, we were able to add another 150 air mile exemption, which is 172 road miles, to the back end of your livestock hauls when you are loaded. I think you all probably know that you currently have 150 air miles on the front end of the haul from your point of your starting point of location for the day, and that is for all of agriculture. Within the last highway bill, the big win for NCBA and for you all was getting that extra 150 air miles on the back end. I think there's been so much going on in the transportation space over the years of COVID and after that. Sometimes I feel like some of that information got a little bit lost. And so I just wanted to kind of remind everyone that we do have that exemption. And when you have questions or you get pulled over, I always tell people to reach out, that we're happy to make sure that that the local DOTs and at the state level, that law enforcement knows what exemptions are out there. Another issue that has come up that we worked on in the last Congress. So the Obama administration, as well as the Biden administration, attempted the speed limiter rule. NCBA has direct policy against speed limiters on trucks. And so what we hope is that the speed limiter rule that is sitting over at FMCSA will simply just go away. If not acted upon by Secretary Duffy, it will simply just fade away. Doesn't mean that the next administration would not attempt to bring it back up, but that is something that we have spent a lot of time pushing back on because we think it's certainly a safety issue and something that our members do not support. Again, I just want to put in another plug and a reminder that we will keep those lines of communication open with Secretary Duffy. We're excited that he's in place. It's probably not lost on anyone on this call that right now there is a lot of focus on air travel and due to a lot of unfortunate and very sad incidences recently, there has been a lot of focus in that space, but there is still a push to work very far ahead of time on a new highway bill to the point where they have already had, as I stated at the beginning, we have had an opportunity to sit in front of committee staff on House T&I and talk about our priorities. And I mentioned most of the things on this list. Didn't want to inundate them with too many things because we want to get some things across the finish line, but definitely reiterated our desire for an ELD permanent exemption, as well as an exemption from hours of service moving forward. So we will continue to work with the Commerce Committee and the EPW Committee on the Senate side, as well as House T&I. If you find yourself in DC and you're meeting with member offices, please remind them that livestock transportation, driver shortage in our industry, truck parking, these are all things that we are working on, that we are vocalizing to these members, and there is a lot of interest across the Hill to take care of some of these transportation needs kind of across the industry. And with that, Miss Michaela, I will pass it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Allison. Jesse, I am passing it off to you now.
All right, perfect. Can you see my screen all right?
Yep, it looks good.
Okay, so tonight my goal is really to highlight the impact of a foreign animal disease outbreak and what that would look like for transporters. And so I do want to remind many folks of how important transporters are to our industry. I think Allison did an awesome job of showing how NCBA is constantly fighting to help our transporters when it comes to moving cattle across the U.S. But essentially, you know, cattle make several different trips throughout the entire life cycle. And so the one I'm showing here is kind of more of an expanded. Now, we know that sometimes they might go directly from the cow-calf directly into the feed yard, or if the person decides to retain ownership and feed their own cattle, they could go straight into the packing facility. But we need to remember that there are times where they might load up on a truck several different times throughout their life cycle. So how will a foreign animal disease impact transporters in the U.S.? So let's say, just recently, Germany just had foot and mouth disease show up within their nation. And if we had somebody over in Germany that came back to the U.S. that did not take the necessary precautions and did not was not very truthful in that if they were on an operation that might have that disease, or maybe they picked up and became a carrier of that disease and brought it back here onto U.S. soil, what that would look like. So after we detect foot and mouth disease within the United States, we are going to have a grace period. Now, I've seen numbers ranging from 8 to 12 hours of grace period. And during that grace period, all ships with U.S. beef or U.S. product from a cloven hooved species, so that would be pork as well, or any lamb or goat, that would all return back to the U.S. It would not continue on. And then all livestock trailers that were loaded would either need to return from their point of origin or get to their destination. Now, jumping over back to the ships and our export, we would essentially lose all of our export immediately, which is a big deal. I don't know the accurate number right off the top of my head, but I believe it's real close to $500 per animal that we harvest in the U.S. is what we get when it comes to export markets. Now, when it comes to livestock trailers being out on the road, that could be a big issue for us, especially if we have cattle destined to sell barns. If you were to talk to our state veterinarian here in Nebraska, he would tell you that any operation needs to constantly have at least 72 hours worth of feed on hand for the livestock that they have on their facility because of the stop movement, which we'll get into here. We've seen ranges that it could be anywhere from 24 to 72 hours. It is recommended from USDA that it is a stop movement for 72 hours, and that is just so that state officials and veterinarians can determine the disease spread. Now, I don't know what your operation is for those of you that are listening, but I can tell you that I have feed yards here in Nebraska that they do not have 72 hours worth of feed, and it would be honestly really hard for them to have 72 hours worth of feed on hand in the event that we had to stop movement. So it is a major concern and something that we got to be aware of. Now, that timeline of a stop movement, it could be extended. So you got to remember that if this disease just continues to pop up at other feed yards across the nation or across the state, depending on what state you're in, we could see that 72 hours get extended into, 5 days, 2 weeks, a month. So you need to be aware of that until we get a handle on that disease to stop the spread. So what would an outbreak look like when it comes to a feed yard? So I have popped up here on a map some known feed yards here in Nebraska and kind of picked one out in particular to show as if they were to have an outbreak, what would happen. So first things first is there would be a 10-kilometer control area. Inside that, they would kind of break that off into a 3-kilometer infected zone and a 7-kilometer buffer zone. And so within that controlled area, operations would have to be permitted in order to allow livestock to leave that control zone. So we might actually see signs like the ones I have below. Now, these are, of course, from other countries that are impacted by foot and mouth disease, but we could see signs like this pop up here in the U.S. to where they would have to shut down roads. Now, I asked one individual, Dr. J.J. Gorkechia, he was the state vet with Nevada once upon a time. Now he's with the Department of Ag. And I asked him, I said, so JJ, if we were in the event of an outbreak and I had a neighbor that was within this control area and he decided to still move cattle, what's that going to look like? Now, he isn't speaking for every state, but from what he believes will happen and thinks that will happen is that law enforcement and National Guard may be mobilized to essentially shut down roads to where there is no livestock movement. So it's not going to be you got to dip and dodge to look out. They're going to really cover roadways to make sure that we are trying to limit the spread of disease. And we'll kind of talk about a little bit more on why that's such a big area. So now I want to blow it up to, okay, the disease is spread from the one feed yard to multiple feed yards within this area. And so you can see the impact of how many feed yards from one single outbreak and then it starts to spread, how although this flag here is the actual feed yard that has the disease, it impacts all the feed yards or cattle operations within that area. And I know I'm really sticking to cattle because that's the group we're talking to today, but this is any cloven hoof species. So if we have swine facilities within these, they will also be impacted and will not be able to move hogs either, or any sheep and goats, things like that. And so it's something that really needs to come top of mind for all those in the animal protein industry. So in order to restart movement, we are going to have to understand, what that's going to look like based on where you are as an operation. So if you're a feed yard outside of the control area, you should be allowed to move your animals around, and it should not require a permit. So you can kind of see if you're on this roadway, it's outside of the containment zone. So as long as you're headed to the west, you won't have to worry about it. Now, I do want to go back to picking on our feed yards and around Schuyler, Nebraska, a very large beef facility we have here. And so what's it look like if we have to transport cattle that are outside of a containment zone through a containment zone in order for them to be harvested? So if it is terminal, they might still require a permit, but they might not have to do anything additional because of, I know I said required here, I meant to say it might not be required, in that because those animals are destined straight for harvest, and because packing plants already do ante-mortem and post-mortem inspections prior to harvest, then it probably won't require any additional steps. Now, if we are transporting non-terminal, so if we're bringing cattle from outside the containment zone, and let's say we were bringing a load of stockers that were going to a feedlot that were within the containment zone, then it would first off be strongly discouraged, but a permit possibly would be required to ensure that those cattle were going to that facility and then not leaving that facility. They were actually destined to that facility just in case they became contaminated along the route. So then we talk about, okay, what if we are in a control zone and we need to get to the harvest facility that is outside? Okay, so a permit would be required, and this is where that PIN ID will come into play. So packing plants already have that PIN ID, that premises ID number that you would have to obtain as an operation. So you would have one, and on your movement permit, you would have to list your PIN ID and then where they were destined to, essentially, on that premise ID. Another thing to be aware of is they may require you to follow a predetermined route. And so I kind of highlighted two different routes here. Now, it is obvious that the purple route is probably shorter, but let's say that for travel's sake, the orange route is probably better when it comes to hauling cattle. They could essentially restrict truckers to only be able to transport cattle along this purple route. One, you can see they're only passing one other operation, whereas passing several others. So that would be what could kind of tie into that. So something to be aware of. If it's non-terminal movements, again, that permit being required. If you were trying to transport cattle within here, let's say this was a stocker operation and they were trying to send them to a feedlot, they would have to have a permit. But then they would also have to be able to prove that they are implementing biosecurity practices if they were in this buffer zone here. So let's say this operation here down at the bottom, they have to show that they are within that buffer zone, but they are practicing biosecurity practices in order to prevent the disease from getting on their operation and essentially to keep the disease on their operation if it was there. I can kind of go ahead and tell you if the operation is present on, or if the disease is present on your operation, more than likely you won't be having animals leave your operation. So what can you do as a livestock hauler? So you need to take biosecurity an extra step further. We always highly push daily biosecurity practices when it comes to you and your operation. Why? Because if you're a hauler, and I know Colby will get on here in just a second and he can verify this, but if they're making 1, 2, 3 turns a day, right, they're visiting several different operations in one day. And so if you're the second or third operation, you don't know if the operation they were previously at is potentially fighting a disease or not. And so you want to keep that disease off your operation. And then for a trucker, you want to be the one that prevents that disease from spreading to operations. So how can you take it a step further and maintain, try to help out, do your role in not spreading the disease? So just want to recap from the presentation that we had previously with Lisa Peterson from North Dakota. So how does the disease spread, or how can diseases spread? Contact from different people. So we kind of covered this if we got transporters visiting different operations. But it's also important to remember for the producers on the phone, veterinarians, sales reps. If you're a feed yard and you have different buyers that visit your yard in a day or in a week, they're going to other yards as well. You know, are they cleaning their boots? Could they be transmitting something on their vehicle, right? Which we talked about with contaminated objects. Organic matter. Anytime I'm giving a BQA presentation, I tell everybody in the room, we're all guilty of this. You know, I have guys that come straight from the feed yard, straight into the classroom for our presentation, and they have all kinds of manure and mud falling off their boots. And so it's a potential risk. Contact with other animals or diseased animals. So if you had those animals on your trailer, you could potentially have contaminated your trailer now to where it is now a vector where it's spreading the disease. Or recovered animals that are still carriers and you don't realize there are those healthy animals that are incubating. And so we need to be aware of how that disease can spread. So if you are a hauler, when you show up to an operation, first things first is before you even get there, maybe reach out to them. You should have their contact information and ask them, what are your biosecurity requirements with your facility? And you need to remember, even if you've been to that operation before, their biosecurity principles could have changed, or guidelines could have changed overnight. They could have realized the neighbor is fighting a disease, or they have a disease that they're fighting, and so now they have implemented new biosecurity protocols. So you need to call them each and every time before you show up to the facility. And also remember that their guidelines could be 100% different than the neighbor's guidelines. There are some facilities that might not even have the trucker unload cattle, which we're going to talk about here in a second when we get to the line of separation. So follow those site rules. Wear clean, uncontaminated boots and clothing. There's oftentimes I'll see guys jump out of the truck and go ahead and put on their gear that they wear when they load animals. Well, the thing is if it's the same gear they wore at the previous feedlot, again, that could be contaminated gear and they could be spreading the disease. So a disease. So you need to be aware of that and just use precautions where necessary. So I was talking about the line of separation. So what is that? That's that invisible line we put around a facility and essentially differentiates the dirty side from the clean side. And so that line of separation can vary depending on what the operation wants. And so in this one, I'm kind of showing that the line of separation is at the back of that truck at the loading chute. So it's, if the trucker jumps out, they are to go no further. And maybe the feedlot is the one that's responsible for loading those cattle. Maybe they'll push them up to the ramp, and from there on, the trucker will be the one that gets them sorted inside the trailer, gets them cut, and put in the compartments where they're supposed to be. Here's a slide real quick that just kind of shows an operation that kind of does that with their line of separation. So you have the overhead of the feedlot kind of zoomed in here for you. Their line of separation and their point of entry, which is highlighted with the yellow, is right at the back of the loading, is right at the end of the loading chute. So more than likely, they would ask truckers to maybe stay on this side of the line of separation and allow the feed yard employees to be the ones that actually push the cattle into the loading ramp, and then the trucker takes over once they enter into the trailer. Here's another point of where a line of separation could be. So here's something from some of our guidelines that we have from the Secure Beef Supply website. So you can kind of see we have our loading area. I hope you all can see my mouse that I'm moving around on the screen, but we have our loading area, we have our holding area, and then we have that perimeter buffer essentially. And so this is just kind of to help separate where that trucker might come into the facility or be handling those animals. And so I'll kind of show that here in this guideline, that we understand that our receiving and shipping pens are on the dirty side of our line of separation. And so, there'll definitely be operations where there isn't enough labor on the operation where the trucker does have to help out load cattle. I've been to those operations with Colby and his brother Chad while they've been loading, and they are in the receiving pens. And so the idea would be the line of separation would be maybe further down the drover's alley, essentially, to where those guys wouldn't be if they had been at different operations that day, just to eliminate that risk. I'm not saying that those guys have contaminants on them. All I'm saying is we are trying to reduce the risk of contamination to the best of our ability. So when it comes to cleaning our trailer, cleaning our truck and trailer, once we're done with the day, we've moved our cattle, we're going back, we need to prepare to clean our cab as best we can. You know, you got to remember that if you were loading cattle or you were back there in that truck, you have manure on your boots or your clothing. If it's in the floorboard, and I know many of us might be guilty of this, we need to clean that out. We need to do our best job that we can to clean the cab of our truck and disinfect it. And this is something that will be major in the event that we do have an outbreak. We need to rinse that trailer top to bottom, out inside to outside is the best way to go about that route. Then we'll apply our soap, disinfect the trailer afterwards. Now, when it comes to disinfectant, I highly, highly encourage you to read the label of the disinfectant that you're using. All too often, I'll be actually on operations where they are using a disinfectant. Now, it's not to clean a vehicle, it's to clean something else that they're sanitizing. And they always say, oh, 3 glugs is enough. Glug, glug, that's enough, right? That's not okay. We need to make sure that we are reading that label, following those directions, because there is a ratio to disinfectant to water that we have to follow to make sure that product works properly. Let that trailer air dry. You know, when equipment sits wet, it can, again, allow, if you were to miss something, it can allow for the growth and the spread of bacteria or microbes, essentially. So we need to make sure it's best if we could park that trailer on a slope to where we can hopefully have that water run out of that trailer as best as possible. And then once we're all done, we need to remove our PPE that we were wearing, essentially, make sure it's clean in a sealed bag. And again, this is in the event if we were to have a spread of disease and how we discard that product. So again, this is just repetitive. Just had those pictures on here, just kind of showing you what, you know, I know Colby recognizes this picture really well of their washout, but something to be aware of. Now, when it comes to risks of the industry, this is what you need to be aware of. This is what I see all too often in Nebraska, is where a pot has pulled off on the side of the road, opened their slats, and has essentially illegally dumped their trailer on the side of the road. This is not okay. This is a huge risk to the industry. It's an environmental concern. It's a huge biosecurity concern because of wildlife disease spread. Now, the disease we're most concerned about, foot and mouth disease, it spreads in all cloven hoof species. So I showed you all those feed yards across the state or within that area of the state that we have. And I know they have wildlife in the area. Now, they don't have wild pigs, but here in Nebraska, I know that we do have, especially out here in the Panhandle where I'm at, we have mule deer populations, antelope populations, and bighorn sheep populations. And so if a truck was to pull off on the side of the road and dump their load, and that truck had a contaminated animal that had foot and mouth disease on it, these species would be impacted, and it would add to the spread of the disease and make it a lot harder for us to control disease within the United States. Many of you all may not remember. I don't know, again, who's on, but we once had foot and mouth disease in the United States back in, I believe it was eradicated in 1929. When Dr. Herman gets on, she can correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, it's possible. We can get this disease. We're trying our best to keep it out. So whatever we can do is what we need to do. So I do want to highlight our program, the Beef Quality Assurance Transportation Program. It is a program that I helped lead when I was at my tenure at NCBA. The reason behind this program is really to help ensure proper transportation practices and to prioritize not only human safety but also cattle well-being. It demonstrates our commitment to the cattle welfare, food safety, and quality, and it safeguards our public image for the entire cattle industry. So livestock haulers, if you're on watching, you got to remember that you are so vital to our industry. You're not just moving cattle from A to B. You are what keeps our industry running. So with that, I'll pass it off over to Colby so he can kind of take off on how they implement biosecurity within their business.
Thanks, Jesse. I really just got started with the NCBA and learning about hoof and mouth and how contagious and how dangerous it really can be. And with our program, we started buying and getting basically like pig haulers, you know, the booties, the outfits that I want to start implementing in our loading, especially if we have an outbreak. Because it will be hard to stop, and it will hurt our industry, to the packing houses, to export. It could be a disaster. And so I want to be proactive in this and be on top of it. Julie and I talked a lot about it, and we're big in the NCBA. We make sure that all of our drivers and anybody that hauls for us, you have to fill out a sheet, give us your BQA number, that you're all certified. So those are some of the steps that we take. We have our own washout that we built. So, we offer, hey, let us wash your boots off while we're washing your, you want to set them out so we can wash them off, and a lot of people do that because nobody ever washes them off, or they forget about them, or, tell our drivers, hey, every week you need to switch out a couple times a week. If it's been raining, or it's muddy, or, it's snow, or a little blizzard like we had yesterday, switch clothes out. Wear something different when you're loading. So those are some of the little steps that we have done. We're really big in our animal handling. Jesse comes out. We put on a deal almost every year to teach animal handling. We've redesigned all of our trailers that we have. And I would tell you that we have 0 pinch points in our trailers, in our design that we've done with all our trailers. Like they said, we haul fat cattle, a lot of fat cattle and calves. We go anywhere and everywhere. I don't have a long one like Jesse's got, but I guess if anybody ever has any questions or concerns or thoughts, they can ask. That's all I got.
Awesome.
I guess it's Julie's turn now.
Yeah, thanks, Colby. I think it's pretty awesome that we have all the different people on, and I've said that on each of our webinars, but the breadth of experience we have on this webinar is I think you get the full picture of how important the transporting industry is to us. This webinar is the third in a series of 4 that is supported by our USDA National Animal Disease Preparedness and Response Program grant. The reason the NCBA applied for this grant was to make sure that we developed better education and outreach tools to our cattle industry, from the producers to the veterinarians and the transporters, about secure beef supply, and all of this to further industry collaboration, prevention, and preparedness for foot and mouth disease. Just some to show you what has already been done on the NCBA website under the producer tab. We do have a 1-pager on this project and all the new resources and objectives that we have been working on, which started with building an advisory group that Colby serves on. He is one of 2 transporters represented on there because we knew how important that the hauling industry is and how they needed to be part of the conversation. For those of you, well, Jesse already went over this very well, but we do have handouts on what to expect in a national movement standstill. So at least 72 hours, and it may be extended depending on the extent of the outbreak. The outbreak dynamics is really going to change how we respond, but there are a lot of things we can do to prepare, which is a lot of what this project is doing. Premises identification number, or that PIN number, we have a sheet explaining what that is and how you can apply for one. We also have, if you want to prepare with biosecurity supplies beforehand, or figure out how you can build a cleaning and disinfection station on your operation, that is included all here. We borrowed some resources from the Iowa Department of Agriculture, who has a great video and a great supply list. So we have that. Contingency planning for haulers. So we wanted anybody who hauls livestock, we wanted them to be aware of all the different things that they might be responsible for, but what they can control. There's a lot of things that they're not going to be able to control. They're not going to be able to control, what direction they get told that they need to take. They need to take the truck, but they can control a lot of things on their equipment and communicating with both the owner and the seller, I guess, of the cattle. This we also have enhanced biosecurity steps that haulers can go through and just understand what are some ways that you can help prevent disease spread. And you can apply this in your everyday driving, but this is also going to be very important in that during a foot and mouth disease outbreak. Iowa State also has some great supplemental materials in this document. All of these are available on the Secure Beef Supply website, but we've also collaborated with the Beef Quality Assurance Program, or BQA and SBS have collaborated together to make sure that we are showcasing each other's resources, so that no matter if you go to the BQA website or the Secure Beef Supply website, you're gonna get to where you need. We co-branded a number of documents, and yeah, just trying to keep that message as consistent as possible, no matter where you find your information. We have one more webinar coming up next week on talking to some biosecurity managers and what their roles and duties are when we're developing biosecurity plans for an operation. If you haven't checked it out already, we have a Cattleman to Cattleman episode that aired in October that is all on biosecurity, this project, and secure beef supply and how important that is to the cattle industry. So I encourage you to check that out. The need for the secure beef supply plan is to provide resources to protect your herd in control areas that are affected by those movement controls, but not infected with FMD. So we can try to maintain supply chain integrity as much as we can. During an outbreak, it is not going to be normal. Business will not be normal, but this plan is here to try to make it try to maintain some degree of normalcy with business. Cattle ranchers, feedlot operators, livestock transporters, and packers rely on cattle movements to provide quality beef products to grocers and consumers. And the Secure Beef Supply Plan really provides guidance for moving cattle that have no evidence of foot and mouth disease infection. When we moving these animals to harvest and to other premises, trying to minimize that lost income across sectors of the beef industry. So with that, I want to thank all of our speakers, and we are getting a few questions in. First one, I'm gonna ask Allison. So Allison, you have a lot of you are working for our industry on a lot of really important aspects. What are some things that when you're talking to producers, like what are some ways that producers and transporters can help you in some of the things that you are advocating for? Like how can they get involved?
Sure. So as I mentioned, kind of in the middle of all the things that we're working on, one of the things that members of Congress constantly remind our DC team is they need to hear from on the ground, right? We always joke about DC being a bubble, but it very much is a bubble. And we do our darndest to get out of this bubble and to visit with you all and see your operations, see what you're dealing with. But you're busy, and we know that it's not always easy to have those conversations, but you guys need to be in DC, or at least share your stories with us, any concerns that you're having. You know, I get calls all the time. I got stopped. I didn't have an ELD because I don't have to. The trooper was confused. And, you know, I love being able to help in those situations, because a quick call over to FMCSA usually clears it up relatively quickly. But back to the member piece. members of Congress want to hear from you all on the ground. They will listen to me, but they definitely appreciate when you guys are able to come to town and have those conversations. You can also have them in your district offices, in your local offices. Pop into those offices and talk to the field reps. Tell them what you're dealing with. Tell them that one of the biggest issues that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years is keeping the supply chain moving. That is something that has absolutely resonated with Republicans, Democrats alike, and is absolutely resonating with this president, is that we have to keep supply chains moving in this country, and we have to make sure that we don't see a shortage of beef on the shelves, and transportation is a huge part of that conversation.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Allison. A follow-up to that, and I guess I'm going to bridge over to Jesse too. When we post how many BQA transportation certified drivers we have, does that help you advocate in your role?
Yeah, so whenever we talk about BQA within the state of Nebraska, I think it does. I think it shows how dedicated truckers are to their industry. Now, I know, when it first came out, that there was a little bit of hesitation. I understand that when it comes to, I have to have this done in order to transport cattle into packing facilities. But once they come to a BQAT event and I'm able to present to them the why this program came to be, why this program is important, and then I can kind of show them some industry issues. Because, there's things out there that we have from National Beef Quality Audit data, or just frankly images that show up on social media that when I can show those guys, they can see like, holy cow, I can't believe another hauler did that, or I can't believe that is, when cattle are, bumping their backs when they're going into the bottom of a plot, like kind of Colby had talked about how they've redesigned their trailers, how much that can impact the quality of the carcass. But even all the way down to the type of weather that they're transporting cattle and how we can stress those animals and see more dark cutters and things like that. Bringing that awareness to them helps them take pride and ownership in the program when they go through it. Colby talked about how he's had me come down to their operation, and it's a big deal. We have a full day event of it essentially. We bring in, do some stockmanship as well with Dr. Tom Knopfinger, and feed everybody. And it's great. I really love doing that because the guys there, they don't sit back slouched down in their chairs. They're up and attentive, and they ask questions. And there are times where I might say something where they'll challenge me. And I love that because I can kind of show them this is why we have to do it this way, or why the industry is moving this way. So, no, it's very helpful when we can, when truckers are proud of that program. At one point in time, I know that carpenters were putting signs on the side of their trucks about how they modify their trailers to enhance animal welfare. And so that's just a great example of showing pride in the program and pride in what they do when they transport cattle.
And Dr. Herman, if I could just piggyback off of that, we also here in DC use BQAT and the benefits of that program and what it's done in our livestock hauling space as a talking point when we're over at DOT. It's absolutely something that we want to hang our hat on, and that we want to say, look, we've got drivers that care a lot. We've got folks in the industry that care a lot, and they're willing to go this extra step to voluntarily do this program.
That's really great. I appreciate that from both the production side and also the advocacy side. Colby, I'm going to jump to you. So I think Colby underestimates how much that his company and his family care about their drivers and about the education that they put their drivers through. So Colby, my question to you is, when you do get when you get people who are coming on to your team, how do you train drivers to look for sick cattle and some of these, potential signs of foot and mouth disease? They're kind of ambiguous, right? They're drooling, they're a little lame, they look dull. What are some things that you're working with your drivers when you're teaching them?
Well, first off, my brother or me, a lot of my brother we go out anytime we hire a new guy. Goes out for a week or two, works with them in the pen when we're loading cattle, look. We just had a deal the other day. One of our guys, he said, hey, got this cow out, got into the tub. It looks like his legs broke, but it's not dangling. Put him to the side. He called me. I called the rep, and we go from there. And our rep, if we see it, he doesn't question it. He knows it's not good. It's not loaded. So we're really hands-on with our guys. We always have somebody in charge at any one of our loadouts that's just overseeing, making sure everything's going good. We're not excess use of any hot shot use. We've got with Doc Nossinger, he's taught us a lot. We can load a lot of cattle without a hot shot and quiet, which has been a big game changer. We, as livestock haulers, we haul cattle at the most crucial time in their life, their most stressed out time. They're being pulled from their mom, sorted, put on a trailer, and expected to go maybe 200 miles or maybe 1,000 miles. And that's us. We are the first thing that they see, and we're the last thing that they see in the most stressful time of their life. And I mean, when we pick them up from the feedlot and take them to be at a packing house, everything is crucial in how they're handled. And if we start out with a good experience hauling them as calves, their life in the feedlot or at a ranch or whatever is different than being just go, rushed, yelled at, screamed. I've loaded a lot of cattle that have not been very good taken care of from when they were born to when they come to the feedlot. They're crazy. They'll try to go over the fence at you, and that's all handling. And it's tremendously changed in 10 years. And Jesse's right. We really do. We don't just put on we don't just have Jesse come out and talk and Doc. I mean, we put on a feast, barbecue, games, because and family comes. We're family, and so for us, it's our life. And I've said in our meetings the one time when I was out there in Denver is that it's not so much the drivers, it's an older generation to change, but you have to get the company owner, transport on board. When you have them on board, it's unstoppable. And Cargill, they request our sheets, our loadout sheets. And like I said, you have to have your BQAT to haul, and you have to have it to load for us. And there's none of this, oh, well, you're going in 30 head, I'm just going to load 3 compartments. We load all 4 compartments. And if we have our 4 axle trailers, our quads that are 14 foot tall, you'll even use your jail. And I know some that might seem a little not understanding, but if anytime you want to come look at our trailers, we would love to show anybody. We could put 1,600 pounders in our jail in our 14 foot tall trailers. We've had cameras and video done inside of our trailers, and we're willing to do and show anybody anything. And with that, I guess I don't know what else you want.
No, that's great. I think what you're getting at, Colby, I mean, other than like I think it's an industry-wide dedication. Like all of us need to care about how we take care of these cattle. And
100%.
what you said about animal handling, that's the number one. Like if we wanted to improve the welfare of our cattle, no matter what sector we're in, animal handling that's how we get it done. Like that's the most practical thing that people can have some control over. And I think you really demonstrated that with how you're training your drivers and how you're taking care of those animals when they're in your care. We have Allison, I think I'm going to punt this to you. How many, we got a question on how many cattle are moving on the road daily. And I've been asked that question. And I'm hoping you have a number for me.
I think it's 500,000 a day. So we stay pretty busy. 1 million head of pigs, because I'll be honest, I do I try to team up with as much of the barnyard as I can when we're talking about this. And our pig friends are usually the ones that that tend to team up with us. Also, maybe this will be of amusement to people. Our aquaculture friends are always love to be part of the conversation. So it's certainly been an interesting group, but there is strength in numbers in this town for sure.
That's fantastic. I think I'm going to leave on that because I do think it is a barnyard. Well, it's a all food animals challenge when we're talking about transporting these animals. And I mean, we can learn a lot from our friends in the swine industry. They had a porcine epidemic diarrhea virus outbreak about 10 years ago, but the way that they found it was moving from farm to farm was on trucks and trailers. So we can learn from that in the cattle industry, and we want to prevent things like that from happening. So we should learn from what our other barnyard friends are already doing. But we're coming up on the top of the hour. I appreciate Allison, Jesse, Colby. Thank you for bringing your experience onto this webinar. I think we have some great information for our haulers and our producers out there. But thanks everybody for joining us, and check us out on the recording on YouTube. Thanks.